Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of today's headlines across the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Morning, Dr. Rubin. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning,
Good morning, Adefemi.
How's everybody?
Intellectual today with
Thank you. Yes, the glasses, isn't it? It's doing a little something.
Yes, it's doing something.
Good morning to you, viewers. Let me tell you what's happening around the world. Marco Rubio, that is the US Secretary of State. He has announced visa restrictions on Nigerians accused of undermining religious freedom. Now, according to his post on X, the tighter controls will affect people who knowingly direct, authorize, fund, or support or carry out violations of religious freedom. Now, the move comes just a month after the US declared Nigeria a country of particular concern, and just a day after US lawmakers held a roundtable discussion with religious freedom and foreign relations experts in Washington, D.C. on escalating religious violence here in Nigeria. Now, if you remember, last month, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee, Chris Smith, introduced a resolution recommending visa bans and asset freezes on individuals and entities responsible for severe violations of religious freedom in Nigeria. So that's what we're seeing. Well, staying in the United States with US-Africa relations, and the presidents of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, that's Felix Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame, are set to sign a US-brokered peace and economic agreement with Washington today. Now, both leaders arrived in Washington earlier this week, as well as Kenyan President William Ruto, who will reportedly be present at the signing, aimed at ending this months of long-running conflict in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, the White House has confirmed that President Donald Trump will host the two leaders for this ceremony, dubbed the Washington Peace Summit, where they will formally ratify the deal first outlined in that June 2025 agreement, which was signed by their foreign ministers and later refined through negotiations in Qatar and then in Washington. Now, the accord does follow months of intense fighting, including a recent M23 rebel offensive that seized key cities in North Kivu, killing thousands and also displacing hundreds of thousands of civilians. Lastly, on today's World Brief, renewed UK-German economic ties are on the table as Germany's president is in London for the first full German state visit in 27 years. Under the spotlight are renewed UK-Germany economic ties. Now, the two countries, under the New Kensington Treaty, are pushing for deeper trade, green energy, and defense industry cooperation at a lavish Windsor Castle banquet with festive decor, a 20-foot Christmas tree, and gourmet dishes from smoked trout as a starter to a partridge in puff pastry. The guest list range from political heavyweights to celebrities. You've got Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He sat beside supermodel Claudia Schiffer, a symbol of the cultural as well as the diplomatic reconnections on the table there. Well, before we come over to our colleagues for their conversations, take a look at our newspaper headlines from across Nigeria and indeed the world. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. And This Day does leave with reports that the Senate has approved an amendment extending the death penalty to kidnappers and anyone who supports them, treating kidnapping as terrorism. Now, the paper also says that the Senate has opened a probe into this Safe School initiative over funds that have been already spent, despite the fact that continued attacks continue to target schools. Moving on to the Daily Trust this morning, it does report on the renewed tensions in Rivers State as Governor Simi Fubara and state lawmakers are again at loggerheads. The paper goes on to say that the recurring political standoff has resurfaced despite previous reconciliation efforts raising fresh concerns about governance and stability in Rivers State. Well, moving on to the Daily Sun, it does report that the Federal Executive Council, that's the FEC, has approved the 2026 to 2028 fiscal framework, projecting a 34.33 trillion naira in federal revenue for 2026. Now, the plan sets an oil benchmark price of $64 per barrel and a production target of 2.06 million barrels per day, although the budget will adopt a cautious estimate of 1.8 million barrels per day. Inflation is expected to average around 18%, GDP growth 4.6%, and the fiscal deficit at 20.1 trillion naira. Total Federation revenue is projected to be at 50.74 trillion naira, and that's supposed to be shared across all tiers of government. Let's take a look at some more numbers on the Daily Independent. Now, the Daily Independent reports that Nigeria missed several 2025 fiscal targets despite improved revenue performance. Analysts are saying that structural weaknesses and persistent underproduction continue to push government reliance on borrowing, which we don't want to see more of. Moving on to the New Telegraph. The New Telegraph does report that the Auditor General has indicted INEC, that's the Independent National Electoral Commission, over irregular payments amounting to 5.3 billion naira for the 2019 card readers, citing procurement violations. The paper also reports that INEC will suspend the first phase of voter registration on December 10th, while voters register will be displayed from December 15th to 21st before the next phase, that will start on the 5th of January 2026. Let's take a look at The Punch. The Punch has a picture headline of Ogun State Governor Dapo Abiodun presenting the 1.67 trillion 2026 budget, comprising 509.88 billion naira from internal revenue, with 554.81 billion naira from federal allocations and 518.9 billion naira from capital receipts. Now, major allocations include infrastructure, education, health. Planned projects cover 450 kilometers of roads in the state, school upgrades, and the Olokola deep sea port, a cotton factory, and as well as a 34.1 megawatts power plant. So a lot of development on the way in Ogun State. Now, the Daily Telegraph does report that police will be given access in the United Kingdom. The Daily Telegraph of the UK. Police are going to be given access to Britain's passport database to catch criminals under an expansion of facial recognition technology. Very controversial at this point. And then lastly, the Metro does have UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announcing that baby formula will be made more affordable. This is a win for the Metro newspaper's award-winning Formula for Change campaign. Those are your well-briefed stories and your newspaper headlines from across Nigeria and indeed the world. Love to hear your thoughts.
All right, well, let's begin on Marco Rubio, who, I mean, in the past 48 hours between Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, I'm not sure who's given us more spicy rhetoric, because Marco Rubio had quite a moment yesterday. I watched his interview on Fox News, where he spoke about the Trump administration position that radical Islam is taking over the world, is a threat to the world, that it's not about cornering a community in Iraq or Syria, but that they feel that, ultimately, the biggest threat is to their own country, the United States. And I begin with this just to chime into sort of this renewed vigor, if I may call it that, around trying to check what they perceive is, the progress or the aggressive progression of radical Islam. And this is why, according to this administration, Nigeria is in the spotlight because of the persecution of Christians. Well, they're now saying that they will do a visa ban, which for me, I think is a better approach than a blanket sanction that will now cause, untold suffering to innocent Nigerians. So we're still waiting for the list. Ted Cruz says he has a list as well. The Nigerian government has a list. There's several institutions that have said that they have lists of, terrorism financiers and so forth. So I believe that, of course, in order for them to institute this visa ban, there's going to have to be a piece of legislation that will include the lists of the people who are involved in this. Well, that's what they've done in other countries. I remember when they did the similar sanctions for Zimbabwe, the legislation did have names on a list. So that will be interesting. However, Congressman Chris Smith is saying that he doesn't feel that the Nigerian government is doing enough. He is saying that he feels the perpetrators of all of the criminality are still running around with absolute impunity. So in the last session in the House Appropriations, he called for three things. The first thing he called for was the disarmament of armed groups. He says if he sees that the Nigerian government is actively disarming these groups, then there's room for the United States to ease on their aggressive approach. The second thing he called for the restoration of displaced communities. He's saying for as long as we are not seeing people going back to their homes, then again, we feel the Nigerian government is not enough. And then lastly, the prosecution of criminals. Now, all of these things, we ask ourselves, is it within the United States, jurisdiction to be demanding these things? But unfortunately, we've put ourselves in this vulnerable position. But dare I say, these are the same things that Nigerians are asking for as well.
Yes, truly.
Yesterday, I made the case around following the Congress's second hearing that the disappointing fact, while it was praiseworthy in the interest, but the disappointing fact is that Nigeria ought to take the lead, and I continue to maintain that. Because if we don't do that, then the US will continue to act as big brother and make decisions like this. Let me go to the US visa ban. This is not the first time the US is employing its powers, the executive is employing its powers under the Immigration and Nationality Act, specifically Section 212, addressing areas where the US government can deny or revoke visas of persons across different spectrums, including violators of religious freedom, is contained under the Act. And as part of that is why they've announced that one of the measures, based on the investigations that they have done, because they've actually had, and they continue to have hearings, is that they would take this measure. Recall that in addition to boots on the ground, guns are blazing, that President Trump had threatened Nigeria. He had also said there would be sanctions. And we have not actually really looked at the ramifications of economic sanctions on the country, especially in the area of the fact that Nigeria receives billions of dollars in aid from the United States of America annually. Already, the suspension of aid to support HIV and AIDS in Nigeria, we've seen. Pardon? PEPFAR. We've seen the impact on how people who are living with the condition have limitations in accessing drugs. We talked about it during World AIDS Day on the 1st, and so it's important for us to highlight the fact. Finally, I say this to say that whilst the US is doing its bits, at least to the extent that they feel is necessary to address persecutions of Christians, Christian genocide, the Nigerian side hasn't done anything, even if they say there's no Christian genocide. How about the terrorism belaboring the Middle Belt? What has been done? Where are the sanctions? We only hear of words around, we know who they are, we know where they are. But what has been done? What efforts, what moves have been done? And I still maintain that around the Christian genocide conversation is still debatable, because until they are able to investigate properly the people who are worst affected, they cannot legitimately claim that it's not happening.
Agreed.
Okay, very quickly. The Washington Forum today to be attended by President Felix Tshisekedi of DRC and President Paul Kagame of Rwanda. Now, both countries have been at each other's loggerheads, with DRC claiming that President Rwanda is the one supporting the rebels in Eastern Eastern DRC, causing a lot of problems in Kivu, in Bukavu, resulting in violence and the displacement of thousands of persons. Now, so Washington Forum, both of them are there. The program for today, at 10 a.m. EST, Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Rwandan time, the two presidents will be received by President Trump, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and other senior officials to set the tone of the meeting. At 10:30 a.m. to 11:30, they will have a meeting at the East Room. And then at the end of that, both leaders from Congo, DRC, and Rwanda will sign the peace agreement. Now, part of the content of this agreement, we're told, will include, ceasefire, disarmament, possibly access to humanitarian issues. But don't forget, one element in that discussion will be President Trump saying, well, he's trying to make peace, and, America is interested in mineral resources in the Eastern DRC, which is very rich. Now that they can't have access to rare earth materials in China, they are looking at Congo. But of course, President Trump will claim credit for that. After that, statements will be made by the two leaders. Then at 11:30 EST to 1 p.m., they will have what is called a working lunch. And then later after that at 1 p.m., which is 8 p.m. Rwandan time, there will be a press conference, and Leavitt will be there. So the question to ask is, in June, America intervened between the same two countries. In November, Qatar intervened between the M23 rebels and also DRC. Nothing came out of that. What will be the way forward? What is likely to happen this time around? That is a big question. Will this lead to peace? However, William Ruto, President Ruto, is there as some kind of guarantor. He being the chairman of the East African community. The other person that I think should be in the room should be that Angolan reporter, Herreras Venas, when the meeting in June held, and President Trump was excited by her pulchritude, telling her, you are beautiful inside. I hope they will remember to invite that Angolan journalist to put President Trump in a very good mood. Finally, diplomacy yesterday in St. George's Hall, King Charles III hosting the German president. Well, some politics there beyond, just having a festive event as follows. The king used the occasion to talk about Ukraine and to reaffirm England's support for the EU, ensuring that Russia ends its invasion of Ukraine. That was a political statement. Yes. Maybe it was drafted by the government for the king. But it was also a very friendly atmosphere with the German president reminding the king that that 20-foot Christmas tree that you referred to was started by a German, yes, Queen Charlotte, in 1800, who was married to King George III. And then some jokes about football. But it was a very convivial occasion with the Duchess of Kent, Kate Middleton, wearing a very special tiara, and Claudia Schiffer also there.
Doesn't she?
Supermodel always.
Some beauty in the room.
Yes.
Well, let's end it there. Thank you very much, Adefemi Akinson.
You're welcome.